¿Desde qué ciudad y país nos ves? Escríbelo abajo, respira hondo, ponte cómodo, y suscríbete con la campanita para no perderte ninguna historia que dobla el tiempo. Picture this, compadre. Chihuahua's deserted. Asleep beneath a full moon, silver lights, sliding over thorns, sharp enough to draw blood from the wind itself. Then, a sound splits the silence. Not a coyote, not a man, but something between, a cry dragged out of an old body punished for daring to grow tired. They say the land remembers every drop spilled on it, and that night, the sand began keeping score. Don Enrique Vargas stood at the edge of his hacienda, boots polished, smile thin as a razor. Let them watch, he whispered, and they did. Children, wives, sons, while Abuelo José, near 80, was pressed against the spines of a giant maguey until his skin bloomed crimson. No one breathed, even the wind seemed afraid. By dawn, vultures circled and whispers spread. Someone had ridden north through the dunes, barefoot bleeding, carrying a name that could wake ghosts, a name that turned fear into fury. Some call him a bandit, some call him a saint, but those who've seen what he leaves behind call him justice itself. They say when Pancho Villa heard what the landowner did, he didn't speak for a long time. He just looked at the map, marked one red X, and said, at sunset, the cactus drinks again, but not the same blood. Stay right here, porque what happened next turned the desert of silence into a legend whispered for generations. And when you hear how it ended, you'll never forget the sound of that first scream. Don Alejandro Rebelending what he called Hacienda Purificación. He preached that the land could not carry idle mouths, that age meant waste, that mercy spoiled discipline. Anyone who faltered became ballast to be cut loose. That is what befell Gregorio, whose 70 years of sun and dust had thickened his hands and curved his back into a ledger of the hacendado's fortune. Time, the tax collector, even lords obey, came for him in the Maguiras one noon when knees shook and sight blurred. He steadied himself with a hoe, tried to hide the swim in his head, failed and folded like a sapling in hard wind. Heat pressed down, the kind that splits stones and makes birds quiet. A foreman saw the fall and smirk as if gravity served the estate. His sons ran to lift. Pedro steadied those shoulders. Carlos took the blade and wiped sand from the edge. They begged for shade and rest. The overseer sneered that broken tools belonged to the fence line. By afternoon the bell tolled offbeat, gathering workers around the courtyard nopal, whose arms clawed the sky. Don Alejandro descended his porch like a magistrate, silk glimmering, boots polished. Order demands examples, he said, and pointed. Caporales stripped the elder to the waist and dragged him to the cactus. Coarse rope crossed his chest, needles pressed, then enter, slow and certain. The first sound he made was not a shout but a husk, as if humiliation had dried the throat before pain arrived. Sweat ran, blood beaded, flies found him, children looked away, men clenched jaws, wives whispered prayers no one in power heard. Serve as warning, he cried. This is the fate of the obsolete, fit only to feed soil. Gregorio's shoulders rolled with each stab of thorn, then settled into a trembling that would not stop. When the ropes finally came off, he sagged. Pedro and Carlos bore him home while the crowd drifted like smoke. La Sombra sprawled across the badlands, adobe walls, iron gates, corrals stitched to fields of thorn. Rurales drank at its cantina for free. The jefe politico signed papers in the salon. Power moved like wind unseen. Nights cracked with coyote cries. Days baked men until thoughts went brittle. Families lived in jacales that leaned together for warmth and fear. After the spectacle, the family made a sick room. A canvas cot, a basin, a lamp with a stubborn wick. Salted water cleansed punctures. Mashed herbs cooled angry skin. Every hole in that torso wept a small tear. The worst wound lay behind the eyes. Gregorio watched nothing. He did not ask for tortillas or broth. He lay like a field after locusts, quiet and grey. The grandchildren kept vigil, shooing flies, guarding dignity. Pedro sharpened a machete until steel sang. Carlos thumbed cartridges that did not match the rifle's chamber. Rage rose, then receded when they met their mother's gaze. Retaliation would buy funerals, not relief. The shame of standing still while an elder suffered sat like a stone under the tongue. Outside, the Casa Grande pushed music into the dark. A violin soared, glasses clicked. Don Alejandro praised efficiency, promised bonuses, and ordered patrols doubled. He joked about the old man's lungs. Beneath that mockery, fear also worked. The tale moved from cook fires to well lines to market stalls. Each telling reached farther than the last, and every listener pictured a loved one against thorns. On the second night, Gregorio stirred when the lamp guttered. Mateo, the youngest grandson, thin as a reed, had not left his side except to fill the shog. He had counted the punctures like stars. Shame turned to heat. Heat found a path. Camp stories spoke of a man who despised tyrants, who made widows' cupboards fat and overlords' courage thin. Bandit to newspapers, savior to villages, the boy decided to find him. Before dawn, Mateo wrapped a heel of bread and a lump of piloncillo, slid a gourd canteen onto a rope sling, and reached for Gregorio's machete. The handle was worn smooth from harvests. It fit his palm as if it had always waited. He kissed the elder's temple. A small tremor answered. No blessing, no speech. He stepped into cold sand while the sky still held a few tired stars. The desert tests, every morning glittered. By noon the air was iron. Mateo kept to arroyos and mesquite thickets. He hid when riders clattered along the ridge. Thirst climbed his throat. He rationed sips. The wind pushed dust into his mouth. He walked until his feet went numb, then kept walking because stopping felt like treason. Near sundown he found fresh prints in a dry wash, horse and boot layered over javelina tracks. The smell of coffee crossed the trail. Two silhouettes waited by the rocks, rifles across their knees. He set the machete down, raised both hands, and said he wished to speak with the general. The nearer figure did not stand. The barrel rose like a finger. Which general? Villa, the boy said. They brought him through mesquite into a camp, held together with calm. Men cleaned mouths. In the center sat a stocky figure with a red bandana and a mustache like a drawn mark of intent. He read a letter, folded it and looked up. The camp waited. Water first, the man said. Mateo drank until his hands stopped shaking. Food second. A strip of meat and a tortilla. Tell it when you can. The story spilled. The bell, the stripping, the ropes, the cactus biting like knives, the crowd forced to watch, the walk home, the silence in their hut. When he finished, the fire sounded loud. Your grandfather's name, the man asked. Gregorio, el hacendado, Don Alejandro de las Sombras. How many rifles? 10, perhaps 12. How many dogs? How many guards? Which town officers dined at the big table? Mateo listed caporales with leather whips, cousins with badges, clerks who signed deeds with ink that might as well be blood. The man nodded after each answer, as if he had heard this list before. You did right, muchacho, he said. Then to his riders he spoke without hurry. Quiet men on the exits, knives for the sentries, poison meat for the dogs, no shots unless necessary. The bell will ring for another purpose. A map was scratched in dust. Paths circled the Casa Grande like nooses. Back in the jacal, Pedro listened to the wind and thought it sounded different. Carlos stepped outside and saw stars clustered above the patio like nails in a board. Their mother dozed, rosary beads clicking. Gregorio's breath went on, stubborn as footsteps. Don Alejandro poured brandy and congratulated himself on firmness. He planned an eviction for dawn and told the lieutenant to collect arrears. Men laughed too quickly, then raised glasses. The riders moved at moonrise. Hooves wore burla. Spurs stayed quiet. Shadows carried them along the ditch, and through agave rows. A mastiff nosed poisoned meat and lay down as if relieved. Two porch guards slumped in chairs by the door. Hands took their throats and ended questions they never asked. The kitchen door lifted without a squeak. Grease and cinnamon scented the dark. Justice slipped inside like a cat. Mateo followed 3 paces behind the stocky man, heart matching the drum in his ears. He had left as a boy with a trembling mouth. He entered the mansion as a witness. One thought cut through the noise. The cactus would drink again, but not the same blood. Aquella noche, mientras la familia velaba el silencio de Gregorio, Mateo tomó su decisión. Los murmullos de un forastero del desierto habían llegado hasta él, historias contadas en ferias polvorientas sobre un hombre y su tropa valiente, un caudillo que no temía a los hacendados y que pagaba las injusticias con plomo. Bandido para algunos, santo para otros, pero general para todos. Pancho Villa. Buscarlo era una locura. Los rurales podían atraparlo en el camino, y los revolucionarios, desconfiados de los desconocidos, podían despacharlos sin pregunta. Pero quedarse allí significaba una muerte lenta en el hedor del deshonor. Antes del primer canto del gallo, cuando el cielo apenas clareaba, Mateo se levantó, guardó un trozo de piloncillo, llenó una cantimplora, tomó el machete curtido de Gregorio, la única herencia familiar, y besó la frente arrugada del anciano, aún prisionero de sus pesadillas. Luego salió descalzo sobre la tierra fría, con el corazón martillando y el alma empujada hacia la garganta del desierto. El viaje del muchacho fue un crisol de pruebas. El desierto no perdona aprendiz. El sol lo castigó con fuego, la sed le desgarró la garganta, el hambre lo mordió hasta hacerle temblar las manos. Avanzó por los bordes evitando caminos, buscando raíces y tuna. Cada ruido era amenaza. La silueta de un coyote parecía un rural, el chasquido de una rama, un disparo de carabina. En las noches, el frío se convertía en verdugo y las dudas en compañía. Recordaba la risa de Gregorio, las historias donde la dignidad valía más que la vida y aquel grito en el patio que se había clavado en su pecho. Eso más que la esperanza lo mantenía en pie. Al tercer día el agua se había terminado y el piloncillo era solo un eco dulce entre los dientes. Los pies le sangraban, el cuerpo se llenaba de rasguños y su mente flotaba entre delirios. Bajo un huizache torcido, cuando estuvo a punto de rendirse, divisó un hilo de humo elevándose desde una colina pedregosa. Podían ser enemigos, pero la desesperación era más fuerte que el miedo. Gateó, usando el machete como bastón, moviéndose con la terquedad de quien ha jurado algo sagrado. El olor a carne asada y café fuerte se filtró en el aire. Escuchó risas, voces graves, el rasgueo de una guitarra triste. Se escondió detrás de una roca, el corazón golpeando con furia. Frente a él, una veintena de hombres descansaba sobre petates, limpiando carabinas, afilando cuchillos. Llevaban sombreros tejanos, pechos cruzados por bandoleras, ropa color tierra que se confundía con la arena. En el centro del fuego, un hombre robusto de bigote espeso y pañuelo rojo al cuello, hablaba con dos de los suyos con una calma que solo los líderes verdaderos poseen. No había duda, el general. Mateo sintió que las piernas le temblaban. Había llegado al tribunal de la revolución. El paso más difícil era el siguiente: hablar, rogar, apostar su vida por justicia al calor de aquella hoguera. Dio un paso, luego otro. Las llamas iluminaron su rostro sucio, sus ojos febriles. Varios fusiles giraron en su dirección, el metal brillando como advertencia. «¿Quién anda ahí?», gritó una voz áspera. Mateo levantó el machete y lo dejó caer, mostrando las manos vacías. «Soy gente de paz, busco al general Villa». El silencio cayó pesado, interrumpido solo por el crepitar del fuego. Un hombre alto se acercó con el rifle en alto, desconfiado, y le arrebató el sombrero. «¿Y qué quiere un chamaco como tú con el general? ¿Lo mandan los federales?». Mateo tragó polvo. «Vengo a pedir justicia». La respuesta resonó más allá del miedo. Hubo murmullo. Entonces, desde la sombra del fuego, la voz del general emergió. «Déjenlo pasar». Los hombres bajaron las armas. Villa lo observó desde su asiento, la mirada oscura y paciente. «Dale agua primero», ordenó, «luego comida». Nadie cuenta historias con la lengua seca. Mateo bebió hasta que el cuerpo dejó de temblar. El café sabía a salvación. Comió trozos de venado asado, lágrimas mezcladas con la grasa. Villa esperó sin prisa. Cuando el muchacho terminó, el fuego bajó y la luna se alzó sobre los rifles. Entonces habló, contó todo: la vida de Gregorio en los campos, las décadas de trabajo, el desplome bajo el sol, el castigo frente al cactus, las cuerdas que cortaban carne y la risa del patrón. Habló del silencio posterior, del cuerpo sangrante, de los ojos vacíos de su abuelo. Dijo los nombres de sus hermanos, de su madre, del miedo que los encadenaba. A medida que narraba, las risas del campamento se apagaron. Ni el viento se atrevió a soplar. Cuando terminó, Villa tomó su vaso de hojalata, lo vació sobre la tierra y lo dejó caer. Se quitó los lentes redondos, los limpió con un pañuelo y lo miró directamente. «¿Cómo se llama el viejo?». «Gregorio, mi general». «¿Y el hacendado?». «Don Alejandro de las Sombras». «¿Cuántos hombres tiene?». «10 o 12, algunos con carabinas, otros con machete. Villa asintió despacio, como quien firma un decreto invisible. Entonces habrá que pagarle con su propia moneda. Se levantó y el fuego dibujó su silueta, como si el desierto mismo se hubiera puesto de pie. Tú, Ruiz, dijo, reúne 6 hombres, salgan antes del alba, vean por dónde respira la hacienda. Herrera toma 3 y flanquea desde el magueyal. Nadie dispare antes de que yo hable. Los hombres obedecieron sin ruido, los petates se enrollaron, las armas se limpiaron una vez más, los caballos relincharon bajo la luna. Mateo los observaba incrédulo, sintiendo que el mundo giraba por su culpa. El niño que salió con hambre y miedo había movido a un ejército de fantasmas de carne y pólvora. Villa se acercó, le puso una mano en el hombro. Tu abuelo trabajó por el pan de otros. Tú trabajas por su nombre. Quédate atrás esta vez. Cuando el gallo cante, el desierto tendrá memoria. El general montó a su caballo y desapareció en la oscuridad con sus hombres, como si la noche los hubiera tragado. Mateo se quedó junto al fuego moribundo, viendo las brasas que parecían estrellas caídas. Entendió que algo había cambiado para siempre. El viento del norte soplaba distinto, llevando consigo un presagio. Dicen que esa madrugada, el cielo sobre las sombras se encendió con reflejos de fuego y relámpagos sin tormenta. Algunos juraron haber oído al cactus gemir como un hombre, otros, que la voz de Villa retumbó como trueno al decir, ahora la tierra aprende justicia. Y mientras el sol nacía detrás de los cerros, el muchacho delgado, que se había perdido en el desierto, sonrió por primera vez. Sabía que al fin, su abuelo dormiría sin pesadilla. The first to spot Mateo was Javier Ruiz, carbine, shoulder in a blink. Sight settling on the gaunt tremor beyond the stone. Camp energy hardened. 15, 20 barrels swung to his chest. He went white, hands lifted, machete slipping to dust. The boy who had braved wilderness thought doom waited at destiny's doorstep. ¿Quién vive? Rasped Tomás Herrera. Voice sand rough. The wrong reply meant riddling. Mateo forced sound through a dry throat. Gente de paz. Busco al general Villa. To name him so boldly was audacious. Herrera and Ruiz advanced. Distrust cut into their faces. Ruiz flicked the palm hat aside with his rifle stuck. What does a runt like you want with the general? Enviado por federales? Bite? Cold steel touched Mateo's chin. Oil and powder stung his nose. Before fear finished its work, another voice steadied the night. Rooted and calm. Ease off the boy, said the general. If harm were his aim, he would not come open-handed. Lower arms, slings creaked as weapons dipped. Villa, at the fire, ran a comb beneath his mustache and studied the newcomer as if reading ink beneath skin. Water first, he said, gesturing for a canteen. Then meat. An empty sack stands not, a dry tongue spins no yarn worth hearing. Kindness disarmed Mateo more than threats. Expecting a demon, he found hospitality. He drank, ate venison, and steadied. Camp noise ebbed to hush. Dice paused for a moment. The guitar fell still and eyes gathered. Now speak, said Villa. Tell the truth, and tell it clean. Mateo began, voice quavering at first, then strengthening as memory kindled anger. He painted Gregorio's lifelong toil, Don Alejandro's arrogance, the wrong bell, the stripping in brutal daylight, the march to the towering nope. He told how rope pressed an elder's ribs, while thorns entered, how children hid and men studied dirt to keep from breaking, how the family carried him home while laughter drifted from the big house. As words flowed, camp weather shifted, mirth died, smirks folded into hard lines. These riders, lean with travel and scarred by campaigns, felt something rare disturb their faces, a breach of northern code. Cowardice against elders is a stain no washing clears. He finished with a breath that almost became a sob, then stilled it. Silence thickened, a blanket over coals. All eyes went to one man. Villa took a handkerchief, polished his spectacles with deliberate care, and slipped them back on. Behind the lenses, his gaze burned like a banked ember, icy, perilous, contained by will. The dead man's name, he asked. Mateo faltered. Gregorio, mi general, he lives. Not him, boy, Villa replied softly. De hacendado. Don Alejandro of Hacienda Las Sombras. His rurales. 10 to 12. 5 or 6 with carbines, the rest machetes and clubs, 2 dogs in the courtyard, a bell rope at the chapel, windows barred below, open above. Villa nodded once. Verdict sealed. He rose without hurry and turned to the troop. Ruiz, you and 5 go ahead. Count lanterns, mouths and horses. Watch gates, roof lines, fields. Mark who smokes and who prays. Herrera, flank with me through the maguey. No shot premature. We catch him supping, pants down, convinced the night belongs to him. The camp chains stayed like iron to blade. Petates rolled tight. Bandoliers crossed torsos. Canteens filled. Saddles creaked upon ribby horses that tossed their heads as if purpose tugged the reins. Sand hissed over coals until only a red coin glowed. Mateo watched, awed and afraid, feeling like a pebble set rolling that now birthed a downhill roar. Villa swung onto siete leguas, settling with the finality of a gavel. He leaned down, gripped Mateo's shoulder, and spoke gently. You acted with honor, muchacho. We will finish it, but you will not stand where the first bullet goes. Let me come, Mateo blurted. I can show the irrigation path, the broken hinge, the alley behind the granary. You have shown enough, Villa said. Courage takes many shapes. Tonight, yours is to wait and to trust. He released the shoulder, turned his horse, and tipped 2 fingers. A quiet command rolled outward, and the troop melted into the dark, like ink poured into water. Shape becoming absence, absence becoming Herrera lingered long enough to hand Mateo a blanket. Sleep while you can, he murmured. There will be a new kind of noise before dawn. Then he was gone, a silhouette joining others along the arroyo lip. He stood, clutching the blanket, while the desert resumed its route. Mateo's thoughts returned to the hut, where his family watched an unmoving chest rise and fall. The cactus loomed in his mind, black against stars, each spine a small moon. Sleep crept with soft paws. He yielded and curled on the blanket, palm under cheek, machete sheathed knee. Dreams hissed with sand and hoofbeats. A touch on his ankle woke him. Herrera crouched, eyes reflecting starlight. Up, he said. You will not ride into the yard, but you may walk to the lip. See the lesson begin. They moved through creosote and mesquite, avoiding stones that might ring. From the rise, the hacienda lay quiet, walls pale, roofs dark, the patio nopal looming. A lantern burned by the kitchen door. A guard leaned, fighting sleep. Another perched by the gate, and watched nothing. Beyond the chapel, 3 horses dozed. Herrera pointed to shadows, sliding along the field edge. Ruiz and his 5, another cluster seeped from the road. The kitchen lantern blinked. A shape passed behind the glass. That is him, Herrera whispered. He enters where pride forbids locks. They crouched until time lost edges. Then the lantern died. A dog gave a single confused bark, and then nothing. A moth tapped the lamp. Mateo's heart beat a drum roll only he could hear. Herrera's hand found his shoulder, and steadied it. An owl call drifted twice. Movement quickened. Shadows detached from walls, poured through the kitchen, and took the porch. The gate guard stiffened, then folded without a shout. A sleeper in a chair slumped deeper. No gunfire broke the night, only the soft grammar of movement and breath. Herrera rose into a crouch. Now the general speaks, he murmured. If words fail, thunder follows. From the porch, a voice carried calm, unhurried, impossible to ignore. Mateo could not catch every syllable, yet the tone was a weight. It was the sound of someone who had chosen and would not choose again. He exhaled and laid down the last of his boyhood. Whatever followed would write itself into the way the desert remembered names. Behind them, the horizon began to pale. Night loosened its grip. Herrera tapped the machete hilt. Keep this for after, he said. There will be fences to cut and harvests to plant once lessons are learned. Below, the troop spread until every exit was a held line. The Casa Grande stood ringed by and in the circle's center, the man with the steady voice, prepared to return a debt exactly as it had been incurred, interest payable at dawn. Then he lifted a hand, and the dark moved when he moved, and the world tipped toward justice, as horses breathed, like bellows, and the quiet before reckoning drew tight as a string. Vengeance is cavalcade like zapotes, clamor. No war cries, no skyward shots. Hooves dulled on stone and sand, the column a silent serpent beneath a sliver moon. Villa rode in front, stocky frame rigid, mind-mapping trails, gullies and shadows. The desert that baffled strangers was their house. They knew its doors, its drafts, its groans after midnight. Men traveled inward, braided by purpose. Herrera guarded the left with hawk, patience. Ruiz watched the right. A feral youth tempered by borders and lean seasons. Specialists allow trackers who read ground like scripture. Knife masters quicker than breath. Marksmen flicking coins at 100 yards. Not rabble-tempered steel. They were not fighting. They were hunting. Tension rose not as fear, but as a burr under leather, an itch to end waiting. Gregorio's story had moved the camp and woke the pride that sleeps in scar tissue. Every saddle carried a private ledger of insults written by rings, badges and clever clerks. Night offered balance. After hours without speech, dawn brushed the sky a sickly orange and gave edges back to hill. Ruiz drifted from mesquite like a shade. Patrol at the dry arroyo, 4 men, neighbors hirelings guarding another man's scene. Shots would travel, a detour meant delay. Villa scratched his beard. Craftsman weighing grain. No detour, no shots. He tipped the Gomez brothers hulking, Cat silent and Silvio, flank through the bed. From the rear, knives only, silence before prayer. They slid away and the earth swallowed them. Waiting stretched, heat woke rock early. A thrasher scolded the stillness. Villa watched the arroyo with a statue's discipline. One hand near the pistol, more as punctuation than promise. A choked gurgle strangled the hush, brief as a cough in church. Silence closed again. The brothers rose on the far bank and lifted a hand. Silvio wiped his blade on sand. The path stood open. They crossed without commentary. 4 forms lay still, already becoming a story flies would carry. Death here was not spectacle, only a rung on a ladder. The column flowed on. Senses sharp from the reminder that day has teeth. Tension tightened like a sea. Air smelled of dust, creosote and coffee from a distant fire. Las Sombras added its own notes. Manure, lie and swagger. The line bent to hug low hills mottled with chola. Herrera sent 2 forward to taste wind near the west gate. Ruiz placed a pair by the irrigation wall where mortar had given up. Villa kept the spine together, crawling until landmarks aligned. A complaining windmill mapped the well. Palmas marked the overseer's yard. Lime gleamed on the chapel eaves like chalk left by guilt. Hold, he breathed. They pressed into a cotillo while the moon thinned and light gathered. A mastiff barked once, then twice, then softened as the treated scrap did its work. Boiling beans scented the kitchen. A woman laughed, tired but sincere. Somewhere a rooster swore at everything. Fingers lifted. Meaning traveled without words. A horse stamped, soothed by a palm. Sand hissed along the ditch as they moved another 100 paces and melted into maguey rows tall as men. Spines glittered faintly. Shadows stitched riders to soil. Another signal and momentum froze. 3 traced the inside fence. First yawned, second scratched, third watched clouds and lied to himself about vigilance. Herrera closed a fist. 2 figures drifted and finished the work with finality. So clean the dawn seemed to blink. The third sat down in surprise and stayed there. The eastern wall met a drainage cut by hands that would never reach ledgers. Villa guided the column into that runnel, until the Casa Grande loomed like a ship's hull. The force split. Ruiz and 3 ghosted toward the carriage gate to count iron and ears. The Gomez twins sampled steps and hinges. Silvio climbed. His fingers found holds others would miss. He rolled onto a balcony and peered past curtains. 3 within. Uniforms on chairs. Boots near a trunk. Rifles leaned careless. A servant's tread crossed the passage and faded. Cloud pulled a thin veil across the sun. Chickens worked dust. A bottle clinked in the refuse pile. The land drew breath. Villa lowered his hand. Men flowed. The kitchen latch lifted like a careful note. Heat breathed from a wood stove. A kettle murmured. The cook saw steel in a pot skirt and chose stillness. A nod eased her aside. Another team slid along blue paint that once had been bold. The sala opened, high ceiling, portraits glowering. A carpet polished by years. Laughter rolled once from the comedor. China chimed. Footsteps approached. Hesitated at a draft. Returned to gossip. Ruiz reached an interior arch. Raised 2 fingers, then 1. Then flattened his palm. 2 at the patio door. 1 at the stair. Plus a nervous cousin sitting too straight. Positions understood. Hunters arranged along sightlines like a printer setting tight. aligned, ready to tell a line of truth. Villa stepped into the frame with the certainty of a verdict. The first guard saw a compact figure, recognized a story too late, and began to lift the barrel. Herrera made that intention with practiced mercy. The second misplaced courage and surrendered it to ruse. The cousin reached for bravado, found a table edge, a glass rolled a small arc and kissed a leg. Buenas, Villa said, voice like cool weather after dry lightning, unannounced. Yes, your bell rings for cruelty. Today it rings for accounting. Don Alejandro, silk shining, napkin clutched like a minor flag, worked his mouth. Plate steamed, a roast glistened, bread waited, warm and indifferent, hands flattened on wood, chairs slid back, the rug drank the sound. Outside the ring tightened, riders settled their arches and along the perimeter. The mastiff slept as if relieved to miss orders. A stable boy peeked, met a level gaze and did arithmetic. He lowered his eyes and stayed. Villa tipped his head toward the patio where the nopal rose like a ledger of sins. We will walk, he said. They moved as one animal, household leading itself by dread, hunters guiding with light touch. Morning opened and showed everything without favor. Worn steps, a stain on plaster, a chalk circle by a doorframe. The cactus waited, arms catching light, dew glittering along spines like beads at a widow's throat. The riders formed a crest. Workers drifted from sheds, corners, chapel shade, present because the air had changed. Herrera planted boots and became a pillar. Ruse watched both gates with the calm of a man who knows escape is habit, not miracle. The Gomez twins stood easy. Silvio guarded an angle from above, that outsiders forget. Villa faced the man who had used humiliation as sermon. The general's hands were empty. His words were full. Order, he said softly, demands examples. You will witness one built on truth instead of fear. He let the silence ripen. Wind worried a prayer ribbon. Somewhere a spoon tapped a pot, then stopped. Gregorio labored here longer than your pride remembers. You made public pain an instrument. Today you will meet your own invention under the same light. Don Alejandro tried a smile that had bought many signatures. We can arrange. A lifted finger. Night over Hacienda Las Sombras. 'Twas thick. A storm with waiting hush. The air held still, crickets mute, and a sense of judgment prowled. In the jacales, peons whispered prayers and watched the ridges where riders had flickered like myths rehearsing an entrance. Mothers tucked blankets tighter. Fathers latched doors that never locked. The desert listened now. In the maguey gloom, Villa's men drifted like smoke. The column split wordlessly. Ruiz slid to choke the carriage gate. The only exit, another file ghosted toward the corrals to net a break, and the main body angled for the Casa Grande, threading rows where spines caught moonlight like glass. No clatter of spurs, no shouted cadence, only leather breath sound. The entry was a lesson in war. First came the dogs, Gorians bred to rip the night open. The Gomez brothers left treated scraps beyond the yard. Paws padded, noses worked, jaws chewed, and the beast sank into soft argument and in sleep. No bark, no alarm, just deeper hush. Sentries next. Two lounged on the porch, carbines resting crosswise, eyelids lazy. Herrera and a partner slid along the shadowed wall and settled the men swiftly, guiding them under mesquite where lanterns could not betray them. Metal did not ring. Boots did not scuff. The path cleared as the lantern guttered and steadied. Villa's owl whistle gathered the line. The kitchen door sagged on its hinge, never repaired because fear had served as lock. Inside, Don Alejandro presided over plenty roast pork, mole, glazed breads, wine, while laughter from his trusted caporales buttered the edges. Hunger lived a few yards away. The table mocked it. The comedor door eased inward, and the room changed. Villa entered with pistol, kept level but manner, almost domestic, as if he had come to correct a small discourtesy. 10 men fanned to corners and thresholds, closing every route before minds could invent. Time faltered. A fork froze midair. A joke died. A face bleached to wax. Buenas noches, Don Alejandro, Villa said, voice low and certain. Forgive the unannounced hour. Your door extended the invitation. The fork clattered. A glass tipped. Wine bled across linen. Who are you? What do you want? I'll pay, Alejandro said, tone cracking from command into begging. We know your hoard, Villa answered without heat. We did not come for safes. Herrera and 2 others lifted weapons from walls and chairbacks with efficiency. The caporales, who had thundered at the weak, found their hands flat and quiet. Villa glanced at the feast, lifted a turkey leg, sniffed, set it down. Hard to swallow knowing who seasoned it, he murmured. Then he took Alejandro by the collar, silk soft, grip firm, and lifted him from his chair, as if correcting furniture. Panic scented the air. Outside, he said, light the patio, bring everyone his banquet ends. Yours begins. Torches flared. Doors opened. They crossed into the courtyard, onto the same packed earth, where an elder had been humiliated. Fire painted the adobe. Shadows of nopal arms wrote black script across the walls. Workers stepped from doorways and chapel shade. Some covered mouths, some stood straight. The circle shaped itself without orders. This ground remembers, Villa said, letting Alejandro sink to his knees without ceremony. You turned pain into a lesson. Tonight the lesson returned. Ruiz held the gate. Herrera took the porch. The line curved into a half-moon, leaving a clear lane to the cactus, like a sentence toward its period. Alejandro sought officials and cousins with badges. None appeared. He tried a smile that bought signatures and found it useless. We can arrange terms, he said, and stopped when Villa lifted one finger. Refusal simple and complete. Terms were your privilege when an old man asked for water, Villa said. You answered with rope. You spoke while he could not. Tonight you will hear other voices. He faced the people. If you have words, bring them. Silence held, then broke. A woman with a scarf told how rent doubled without cause. A man described a son kept in stocks as display. Another spoke of wages, shaved by a smooth pen. Each testimony fell like a stone in a basin. Ripples touched every edge. Children gripped sleeves and learned the sound of truth. Villa waited until the basin stilled. Then he turned to the elder's kin. Bring Gregorio, he said softly. 2 sons and a grandson guided the old man forward. His steps were careful. His eyes were alive. He looked at the cactus, then at the kneeling figure, and lifted his chin. This is the place, Villa said to the elder. Not to the Lord. You endured here. What should he learn before sunrise? Gregorio did not speak. He touched his chest, then opened a hand toward the circle, sharing the wound. Villa inclined his head. Then the lesson is public, he said. Measured, not cruel. He ordered water and bread, carried from the kitchen, and passed among the workers. Platters moved hand to hand. Warm loaves replaced wine's perfume. The table that excluded now served. Alejandro tried again. I can donate grain, forgive debts. Villa did not smile. Debts vanish when dignity stands, not when fear bargains. He motioned for stout rope, not to injure but to bind arrogance to its mirror. Wrists were tied. Alejandro was placed facing the cactus, not pressed to it, learning, for now, by sight and by the weight of hundreds of eyes. Listen, Villa told him. The patio fell so quiet that the wind grew loud. You will stand and hear what labor costs, what hunger means, what it is to put a child to sleep with a story that hurts. At dawn you will carry water to those you shame. You will cut thorns, one by one, from this plant and from rows you planted as theater. When the sun is high you will sign papers returning plots to the families whose hands built this house. The rurales will not interrupt that ink. If they try they will read our answer. He turned to the people. If any believe mercy is weakness, watch, mercy has teeth when it guards justice. A hum of assent moved through the half-moon. Baskets and cups traveled. Children ate. The elder sat on a stool and a shawl landed on his shoulders like dawn. More torches, Villa said. Light climbed oil-soaked cloth and washed the walls in amber. The caporales stood with hands bound, learning a quiet they had never practiced. The mastiff slept without dreams. The stars thinned. Called a scribe, Villa. A clerk edged forward with ledger and ink, fingers trembling until duty steadied them. You will record what is given back, said the general. You will sign, he will sign, and copies will live in homes, not drawers. Alejandro swallowed. Ownership collapsed into a man trying to remain taller than fear. Villa regarded him one last time. All these years you taught that power is a private table, he said. Tonight power eats in the open. The torches crackled. The gate stayed shut. The nopal watched like a stern witness as a different order took root, not with a roar but with a steady settling, like dawn deciding to keep arriving until every corner surrendered its shadow. Patio became an open-air court. Torches spattered gelo, while shadows stretched treachery cut across the walls, the nopal, standing like a thorn-crowned judge. Villa's troop formed a semicircle, carbines resting but ready, eyes watchful for any twitch that hinted at panic. Opposite them, people of the hacienda emerged by degrees, timid faces at door cracks, then mothers with infants, then a swelling crowd marked by calluses, stooped backs, and years of fear. Yet tonight, hope flickered beneath dread. Murmurs braided into a single breath as the circle closed and the night itself seemed to lean in. Villa paced with hands clasped, a lawyer gathering questions and a priest measuring silence. Alejandro knelt in dust, silk-stained, hair fallen from its careful shape, cheeks striped with tears he could not hide. "Mi pueblo," Villa said, his voice carrying without a shout. "You know this man. Your sweat, your blood, your years fed his luxury. He repaid you with lash, hunger, and humiliation." Murmurs swelled, then steadied. Villa faced hacendado. "Revolution does not come to steal what you saved or to beg alms. It comes to impose law, not the code that bends for title and peso, but the desert's rule, where deeds outweigh boasts and the weak are not trophies. Crime demands penalty. Victims face their tormentor." He signaled. Men brought Gregorio. His sons supported the slow shuffle, each breath measured. The crowd parted until the old man stood inside the torchlight. He trembled at the cactus and the kneeling figure. His sons steadied him. Eyes once emptied by shame now held recognition and a stubborn light. Villa approached as one greets a patriarch. He clasped the work-scarred hand, feeling ridges left by harvests. "Viejo," he said, "your grandson carried courage across the desert. We heard what was done. Now from you did this man wrong you?" Gregorio looked at Alejandro, once a household god, now only a frightened man. His mouth opened without sound. Knots of disgrace cinched his throat. Tears traced the lines of his face, each drop a tally of unpaid debt. Pedro broke first, voice hot. "Not merely wrong, General. He stole our father's spirit. He forced us to watch as rope bound him to that plant and thorns pierced, while we listened to cries we could not stop. He spat on our name. A woman by the step sobbed. Another lifted a fist and answered, 'Justice.' The dam gave way. Words fell like stones. He took my field, he beat my boy, he shaved wages, he seized grain and left husks. He forbade burial on the hill. Each accusation set a tile into oppression's mosaic, until the pattern glared and Alejandro shrank as if language itself hurled rocks. Years of power crumbled before people who had learned to be silent to survive. He tried to hide behind posture and name. Neither held. Villa lifted a hand and the noise ebbed. He seized Alejandro's hair and raised his gaze toward the circle. "Look at them," he said. "These are the souls you tried to grind into dust. The norteño spirit is like nopal hardened by sun, rooted in lean ground, thorned enough to draw blood when handled with contempt." He released the head. It struck the dirt. "No bullet," Villa continued, voice even. "A shot is quick. This man earns a verdict he can understand and the people can remember. The sentence will set itself where no ledger can erase it." The air turned keen with expectation. In this land, justice often mirrors the crime until comprehension arrives with pain. He turned to Gregorio. "Old father, speak if you wish. If silence serves better, we will honor it." Gregorio breathed, then shook his head and pressed a palm to his chest, before opening his hand toward the circle. The gesture said, "Share the burden." "So be it," Villa answered. "Tonight the people speak and decide how dawn will look." He waved to the kitchen. Bread and water circulated. A small boy bit a loaf and sighed, a sound louder than any speech. The table of privilege became the patio's commons, and that change worked on the crowd like rain after a dry season. Alejandro tried to purchase escape with words. "General, I can make amends. Grain, mules, gold. Name the cost." Villa did not sneer. He only shook his head. "You cannot buy absolution with a currency you debased. Mercy is not a trade. It is a boundary set by principle." He ordered rope brought, not to flay but to bind arrogance to stillness. Wrists were tied. Alejandro stood facing the nopal yet not pressed against it. The lesson would begin in the mind before touching skin. "Listen," Villa told him. "For years you taught with fear. Now you will learn with attention. You will hear every testimony until the oil runs down the torches. At first light you will carry water to those you shamed. When the sun climbs, You will cut thorns from this plant and from rows you planted as theater. When the bell strikes noon, you will sign what should never have been taken." He called for the A man in a worn vest stepped forward with ledger and pen. Villa steadied the shaking hand with a touch. "The record will live here," he said, "and in every home whose name we write." The clerk nodded and set nib to paper. From the semicircle came testimonies measured and direct. A widow told of rent doubled without cause. A boy recounted a brother locked in stocks to terrify others. An old woman described washing floors inside rooms where her family never ate. A mason explained how he raised walls that pushed him from their shade. A foreman, newly brave, confessed weights that skimmed pay. Each statement added a bead to a rosary of harm, and together they formed a prayer none could ignore. Villa let the litany end. "The court has heard," he said. "The people will choose between humiliation that teaches and an end that teaches only silence." He looked to Gregorio's sons. Pedro swallowed, then spoke. "He will live to labor. He will bow to the people he scorned. He will free what he stole and taste thirst in their place." Carlos added, "And he will not forget. If he does, we will remind him." Villa inclined his head. "The sentence stands." He addressed the guard detail. "At dawn, walk him to the wells. By mid-morning, set him to the thorn. At the third bell, bring the table to the patio and serve workers first. At noon, signatures." He faced the semicircle. "And you organize. Choose stewards for water, seed, pasture, and accounts. Your strength is not rage but structure." He returned to Alejandro. "Understand this. Mercy tonight belongs to Gregorio. It is a gift, not your right. If you test it, the desert will teach in another voice." Alejandro nodded without lifting his eyes. The torches hissed, crickets found courage and sang again. A baby that had been silent began to drowse. Somewhere a guitar strummed one chord, then stopped as if even music knew to mark the moment and wait. Villa breathed the cooling air. "Mi pueblo," he said, "your hands will harvest what justice plants. Keep watch over one another. If rurales or cousins arrive to reclaim what you win tonight, send word. The road remembers our hooves." He glanced at the nopal, then at the old man who stood straighter now. The night shifted. It did not roar. It settled as if a long argument finally reached its period. The court dissolved into tasks. Bread moved, papers dried. A boy traced his family's name and smiled. Gregorio touched the shawl on his shoulders and closed his eyes, not in defeat but in relief, while the desert accepted a new agreement and memorized it in the language of stars and dust. Generals decreungen de couleur and turned final. No lead, no blade. Justice would mirror the injury. He nodded to Herrera and Ruiz. "Fetch stout rope from the sheds," he said, "and bring the hammer and the fence nails." They vanished and returned with coils dragging dust and a tool roll that clinked. "Friends," he told Pedro and Carlos, "I know the quick wash of blood tempts, yet stains fade faster than lessons. What we need tonight is a memory that reforms. Your hands will carry it out." The brothers traded a look, heat wrestling with dread, then breathed together. This was not revenge for spectacle. It was a reckoning meant to be understood. He stripped an elder under the open sky. Villa said, pointing toward the patio where a single torch hissed, "Let his pride stand bare in the same place." Under carbines held low but watchful, caporales now shaking, removed the hacendado's finery. Boots, belt, jacket, and starched shirt dropped to dust. He stood in plain underclothes, stripped of display. The crowd's hush deepened. Arrogance found no shield. He bound a man who had given harvests. Villa continued, tone flat as a ledger. "You will bind him so he listens." Pedro lifted a coil, feeling the weight of fiber and years. Alejandro's voice cracked. "Mercy," he said. "I will repay the wrong." Carlos steadied his brother's hands. "Tonight is repayment," he answered. Not loud, not cruel, only certain. They wound line around arms and chests, careful to spare breath and keep posture upright. Each loop drew a soft sound from onlookers, not delight, not anger, only air released. This was not a festival, it was a sentence in Whitman's grammar. Lastly, Villa said, resting his palm on a cactus pad, he used the desert's spines to shame. Let the same desert teach the cost. Breath gathered across the patio. Symmetry stood there, solemn without flourish. To it, the brothers guided the prisoner to the nopal that had been made a stage for cruelty. They placed his back against the ridged trunk, not with violence but without softness, while Herrera passed the rope around plant and captive together. Steady, Herrera murmured, coaching like a foreman who insists on clean. Finale, Villa said, handing the hammer to Pedro and a nail to Carlos. He wanted a visible example, fastened in public memory. So be it, yet ours secures order, not terror. Doubt left the brothers' eyes. Their father's name stood between them like a plum. The first strike rang like a bell. The nail bit wood and rope, fixing one loop so it could not slip. Alejandro startled, then went still as the idea of escape left him. A second strike set the next tether near the arm. The crowd did not cheer. Mothers held children closer. Men let fists unclench. The lesson would stand without shouting. Measured blows followed, enough to keep bindings firm at shoulder and hip, so the prisoner would not sag and choke, nor wriggle free and turn the moment to chaos. Herrera checked each knot, tugged, and stepped back. Done. He hung bound, alive, aware, facing the same courtyard he had ruled. No dramatics, no triumphal cruelty, only an arrangement that said, "Look, understand." People stared, not hungry for pain, but surprised by how different justice felt when it refused spectacle. Pride tried to rise and found no purchase. Villa took the center. "He does not die tonight," he announced. "Relief is not the lesson. The sun will see him. The insects will visit. Dusk will pass and return. Tomorrow, before heat grows, you will decide whether to loosen the ropes and let him work, or to leave him for the birds." Choice returns to the people he ignored. He mapped the future. Hear the law that follows. Respect replaces fear. No more daylight to dark labor for scrap. No more public humiliations. The land first feeds the hands that till it. This hacienda belongs to those who sweat here. Grain goes first to your children, only then to market. If any badge deed or distant cousin arrives to seize back what returns tonight, send word. The road remembers our hooves and our names. He faced the hacendado again. "You will serve tomorrow with your hands. You will carry water, mend walls, and stand in the line you kept others in. If you bend to pride, they will remind you with the same rope. Learn quick. Mercy given and abused turns to iron." He did not wait for thanks. "Vámonos," he told the troop, and the circle loosened into quiet work. The clerk who wrote the transfers folded the ledger and placed it in a woman's hand. Bread moved from kitchen to patio. Elders first, then those expecting children, then boys who would soon be men. Riders relieved the porch watch, so no frightened cousin would undo the night. Back at the camp, dawn met them halfway. Mateo blinked at the paling sky and found breath easier. Speech failed. Tears worked instead. Villa set a hand on his shoulder, steady and brief. "Your family's honor is washed," he said. "Guard. They remounted. Siete Leguas stamped and lifted his head toward the ridge. "Where next?" Herrera asked. Villa's mouth tightened into something between warning and smile. "Durango," he said. "Another estate needs the lesson the desert taught tonight." Behind them, the bell hung silent, awaiting a new purpose. Wind skimmed the courtyard and carried away the scent of arrogance, leaving room for beans, ink, and iron. Revolutions do not rest. There is always another wrong to set upright, another ledger to balance, another circle of faces to invite into daylight. On the patio, minutes stretched toward morning. People remained because a new feeling had entered their bones and asked for a name. It was not triumph or pity. It was the sense of a burden lifted enough for shoulders to rise. Gregorio's son stood near the cactus, not gloating, not ashamed, relieved that a wheel had stopped grinding for one night. Birds called. A woman covered the prisoner's shoulders with coarse cloth, so chill would not harden vindication into mean. A boy set a clay cup of water where he could see it and know that generosity had replaced jeering. An old man straightened a torch because light should not gutter when a community writes its future. Thus the sentence lived through the dark without spectacle, and the people learned the shape of their own power. When morning colored the chapel wall, the bell rang once, not for terror but assembly. The clerk opened the ledger. Men took tool. The cactus cast a long shadow and looked less like a weapon than a boundary marker. From that line back, humiliation. From that line forward, work and memory. On the ridge, horsemen dwindled to specks, and then to the idea of movement. The desert swallowed tracks, not the message. Beyond the next valley, a rumor would become a ride, and another house built on other people's breath would feel evening arrive like a closing hand.
Villa would lift his chin to the wind and listen for the next name the land spoke, and the land at last would believe someone had learned to listen back.
Compadre, you have walked across a desert of memory with us, through torchlight and whispers, past a courtyard where spines once pretended to be law, and you arrived at a dawn where people finally breathed without asking permission. If Pancho Villa's brand of justice struck a spark in your chest, do not let it die in the wind. Cup it with your hands, feed it with a click, and help this flame climb the night. Tell me where you are listening from, what skyline frames your window, which street your feet know by heart, and which name you will speak when the next hard moment demands courage instead of noise. Your voice is part of this circle now. Your echo helps the story reach the ones who still believe nobody notices. Tell us what hit hardest. Was it the bell that tolled for cruelty and learned a new purpose, or the moment a boy left with nothing but piloncillo, a machete, and stubborn breath? Was it the hush when a community realized silence was over, or the single ring at daybreak that said the code had changed? Did you feel the weight lift when bread passed from hand to hand and the private table became common ground? Share the instant that made you pause the video, whisper a prayer, clench a fist, or simply sit still with your jaw set and your eyes clear. That detail matters. It becomes the thread another traveler grabs when the road turns right. If this story reached you while you waited for a bus, kept you company during a graveyard shift, or found you wide awake at 2 in the morning when the world is sharp and honest, leave a sign so the next traveler knows they are not alone. Write a line for the elder in your family who taught you dignity without speeches. Post a word for those who could not stay to watch justice arrive. Drop a cactus emoji if you believe memory has thorns for a reason. Drop a torch if you believe light belongs in the open. Drop a water jug if you believe mercy works best when it carries weight. Subscribe if you want these rides to continue, because we have saddles waiting and roads unfinished. Ahead lies Chihuahua again, and Durango with its iron light, and Sonora where dust tastes like brass and lemon, and a dozen forgotten stations where trains carried soldiers and secrets in the same car. We have letters to open, badges to question, ledgers to read aloud, and kitchens where the last tortilla feeds the youngest first. We chase stories that refuse to bow, and when we catch them, we set them down carefully so no one gets cut. Then we invite you to help us bind them with patience and truth. Our channel is a campfire pitched in moving wood. Some nights we tell of victories that cost less than expected. Other nights we admit the price landed heavy. We do not glorify pain, but we refuse to look away from it. We light the scene long enough for understanding, then bank the coals so no one burns. If that balance matters to you, ride with us. Hit the bell and let the next episode knock on your door. When it arrives, open with your calmest face and your most curious mind. I want to hear from researchers building family trees out of land grants and church books, from ranch hands who know the smell of mesquite smoke at dawn, from students learning the revolution beyond exam dates, from grandparents who carry ballads in their throats, from road workers who measure miles by sunburn lines, from artists who color the borderlands with patience and grit. If your craft is cooking, tell us what stew you would ladle after a long night like this. If your craft is healing, tell us how you would clean punctures and steady breath. If your craft is numbers, tell us how to audit a ledger until it tells the truth. Every skill belongs here. Justice is a wide table that needs many hands. If you arrived here by accident, welcome. If you followed a thumbnail that promised shock and instead found steadiness, welcome twice. The algorithm may toss us together like dice, but we choose what kind of game we play. Around here we set rules. Listen first, speak plain, carry the heavy side when someone tires, and never mock the poor. If those rules sound right, leave a simple "I'm in," and watch how many strangers answer. You may disagree with a choice we made in the telling. Go. Say so with respect and we will meet you at the fence line and talk like neighbors. Maybe you believe harsh men need harsher ends. Maybe you wanted quicker mercy. The desert has room for debate as wide as its sky, and our comments are that sky at midnight, bright with separate fires that together make a constellation. Keep it civil, keep it brave. For creators, translators, teachers, and librarians, use this episode as a hint. Pair it with a lesson on land reform, a quiet poem, a ledger page where a steward wrote the truth with shaking hand. Show a map of rail lines, draw an arrow from a village to a valley, follow the path a rumor takes from well to market. If you adapt this piece, credit the circle that lifted it, not a single voice. We are a chorus on purpose. Before you leave, Look once more at the courtyard in your mind. See the cactus become a boundary marker instead of a weapon. See the bread traveling. See the ledger dry. See the elder's breath steadying. That is the picture I hope follows you into sleep and wakes with you at work. Not vengeance for spectacle, but order rebuilt from courage. Now, breathe, roll your shoulders. Send this to someone who needs proof that wrongdoing can be turned, not by miracles but by hands that decide together. Share if you want more people at the fight. Comment your city so we can chart the way these echoes move, from Karachi to Chihuahua, from Monterrey to Madrid, from Tucson to Tangier, from Lahore to Los Angeles, from the smallest ejido to the tallest tower. Tell us which line you will carry into your day. If you are already part of this camp, thank you. If you are new, welcome. Either way, the next tale is waiting on your screen, ready to ride beside you. Click it, saddle up and keep your eyes on the line where the earth meets the sky. That is where legends prefer to travel, and that is where we will meet again, with another story that refuses to kneel and another morning that refuses to forget. Before you go, drop one promise in the comments, a promise to stand up for someone older, to ask harder questions, to share bread more freely, to keep records honest, to learn a place's history by walking it. One promise, written now, becomes a map for tomorrow. I'll be reading, counting every city and carrying your words into the next ride. Until next time.